Hi, I'm Chloe Austin, the Exhibitions and Research Manager at Maximillian William London, and I'd like to welcome our speakers and everyone watching tonight to today's talk. This talk is in conjunction with the End in Mind, a solo exhibition of new works by Reginald Sylvester II, which is on view until the end of next week, with the last day being the 14th of August. Please allow me to briefly introduce tonight's speakers. Reginald Sylvester II is a New York-based artist working mainly in abstraction. His work is rooted in social realities as well as spiritual practice. His current exhibition at the gallery features abstract and figurative paintings as well as ready-made sculpture, all of which explore the concept of resilience. In 2022, Sylvester will mount his first solo institutional presentation in an American institution in his home state of North Carolina at the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African-American Arts and Culture. Sylvester's work is held in public collections including the ICA Miami, Florida, Wolverhampton Art Gallery, UK, Spazio 1, Lugano, Switzerland, and Fondazione Stelline, Milan, Italy. Allie Biswas is a British writer and researcher based in London. She co-edited The Soul of a Nation Reader, Writings by and About Black American Artists, 1960 to 1980, with Mark Godfrey, which was published in June 2021. She has interviewed artists including Wolfgang Tillmans, Judy Moretti, Adam Pendleton, Rashid Johnson, Maleka Ngozi, and Zanelima Holly, and has written an essay on Arkanora Niles and is working on a publication about the US Embassy's art collection in London. Before I hand over to Ali and Reggie, I would like to say the talk will be for 30 to 40 minutes, and we'll have 15 minutes at the end for questions. If you have questions during the talk, please type them into the Q&A bar and we'll address them to the speakers at the end. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Ali and Reggie.
Hey, good to see you too, and thanks, Chloe, for the introduction. Always. Yeah, I'm excited. How's your day?
It's great. I was just thinking that the last time that we saw each other was at the opening for the exhibition, which I think is the most well attended exhibition opening I've ever been to. I mean, it was
Oh,
absolutely
thanks. Thank
absolutely
you.
packed. And we haven't had a minute to sit down and talk about the work, so I'm looking forward to this conversation. Um, I thought it would be helpful to start by really just introducing the show and showing some pictures of it, um, particularly for people who haven't had the opportunity to see the exhibition in person. So the show consists of 8 new works. There are 7 paintings and 1 sculpture, which is actually the first sculpture that you've made to date. Can you tell us the time frame for these works? When did you start making the series? And also, what was the context? What were you thinking about when you were making these works?
I started these works at the end of the first lockdown. So that lockdown was what, in February. We were shut down, and then towards like the end of the second month, maybe mid third month, I felt the need to go back into the studio, and really it was about me kind of picking up where I had left off from NEMISIS, which is the show that I had with Max in 2019. And I just felt like I needed to do that because prior I was working in Mexico City for 3 months, making paintings, and it was my first time using oil. And I felt like uh, I had learned a lot about color, um, due to making those works there. And so I wanted to kind of come back into my home studio and kind of attack my paintings with this new knowledge, with these new realizations about color and how I build color in my paintings. Um, and so I kind of just, yeah, I thought NEMISIS was like a perfect place for me to kind of piggyback off of and kind of pick up those notions that I left off process wise and try to expand on those things with this new kind of, I guess, the relationship with color. And then these works started to, kind of form, and the same things I was thinking about while making the paintings in NEMISIS is the same things I was thinking about while making these, kind of thinking about the state of myself and the state of the world and people alike, and kind of the sufferings and kind of maybe spiritual battles people are going through, and really just trying to expand on those emotions and those feelings through the paintings, while, you know, attacking some kind of like technical painterly processes that I was mentioning earlier, that I kind of wanted to put some attention to.
Just thinking for a second about like subject matter, and you mentioned this idea of like representing both in terms of personally for yourself, but also like collectively. Where does that come from? What's this interest in representing people, whether it be, you know, a kind of more like abstract sense of community, or more personal things? Like, how did that end up being something that you've really focused on in your work?
Well, I think it's, you know, my journey as an artist is very uh, connected to my spiritual journey, trying to get closer to God and get closer to a truth, when pertaining to the Most High. And so, uh, you know, there could be, you know, the scriptures talk about there being a lot of dark sayings, and you know, it's a prophetic book, and it foretells these kind of things that we're going through. You know, I would say black and brown people alike, and then as well as just other nations of people in the you know, around the world. And so, uh, I think it's, you know, my pops always had told me, you know, to, you know, to have a talent, you know, to honor the creator, you know, you should do that first and foremost. And so I kind of took that to heart, and I always felt that like when I am painting, I always want to kind of pay tribute to that. And so, and then at the same time, just on a personal note, you know, it is kind of in a sense a battle of trying to, you know, uh, I guess trying to maybe be just or be true to these things that you read through in scripture, you know, versus just trying to live your life, and, you know, in a kind of carefree manner. And so, uh, I think that for me, you know, abstraction for me is a kind of a spiritual practice. It's, you know, these are spiritual pictures. You know, this is kind of the reflection of what I'm going through internally, and me kind of putting that out on these surfaces. And so, yeah, I feel like it's almost kind of like a responsibility too, in a way, you know, to kind of speak about these things, um, but, you know, in an abstract manner, because that, you know, I've always been chasing after trying to make abstract pictures, even in my earlier work. You know, it's just about me, you know, putting my 10,000 hours in and doing the education and spending that studio time to kind of get there to where I can actually technically get to these places. And so, um, so yeah.
I think that the new paintings very noticeably mark a shift in your work from the first exhibition at the gallery in 2019. You made reference to NEMISIS. I think NEMISIS was in a way about you know, trying to work out what abstract painting was to you, because you'd kind of come to it around that time. Having, I mean, we can see some of the paintings in NEMISIS show right now.
I'm sorry too, you froze on me a little bit. My
Oh,
connection here got shattered a bit. Sorry.
yeah. So I think prior to NEMISIS, which are these works that we can see from NEMISIS in 2019,
Uh-huh.
you know, you had been working in more of a figurative style. That you were making paintings that were based around the human figure in more of an explicit way.
Hmm.
And I think thinking about the current exhibition, like a couple of years later, the shift has meant that these new works have like a very different tone to the NEMISIS paintings.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, we can just see that kind of contrast right now with these works here. I think overall the show has perhaps quite a somber quality to it.
Yeah.
So my question would be, what role is abstraction playing in your painting right now? And has there been a change in how you're using abstraction as a device in your work?
There hasn't really been a change. I think, again, speaking about those Mexico City paintings, I was, I was in a studio where I had no natural light. So I was painting I had no artificial light or built-in light. So I was only using natural light, but I was building these paintings off of dark surfaces. And if you look at the NEMISIS paintings, I'm building those paintings off of white surfaces. And I kind of found this kind of like, I guess, I had this realization from building from darker surfaces that I can kind of layer paintings in a different way. But they were lacking in texture. And then I was thinking when I got back into the studio after that first lockdown, that, this would be a perfect place to kind of pick up and kind of get into those works. And I'm actually very happy you used the word somber, because I'm an admirer of stark paintings, and I've always kind of wanted to get to a place to make my own kind of stark, somber, kind of dark, muted, abstractions. And I guess to answer your questions about kind of me using abstraction, I mean, it's really, I think about Paul's letters, Paul being a prophet and one of the apostles in the scriptures, and when he was writing his letters to the Israelites or to the Jews who were, in Rome or in Greece, he was writing in a sense of like code, so that when these letters were overlooked, that kind of those underlying messages weren't picked up on, so that when they did get to the people that he was speaking to, they were the only ones who were able to pick up on those things. And so I kind of look at these paintings for me and using abstraction as a way to kind of speak about these dark sayings or these messages that I want to get across. But they're meant for they're almost like coded images. And I think abstraction for me is such a powerful tool in kind of, if I'm having that in mind, to get kind of these messages across where I don't have to be so literal about what I'm saying. And so I think if I'm I guess trying to use abstraction in a way that would be the way that I'm, consciously using it. But also I'm just kind of fascinated with kind of painting from the unconscious and I think me being able to evolve my practice over and over again through trying to make new types of abstract pictures. I think kind of that's the obsession. Um, and then obviously there's a lot of serious or deeper undertones that the abstract paintings, I guess, could serve.
Well, following on from that, I think we have to talk about the role that other materials play in your paintings and the significance of those materials. Something that you have developed from the first series to this series is these discarded materials. So you're using things like rope, as we can see here in this painting, and string, and also sticks.
Mm-hmm.
And there are two paintings that really make those materials visible. And actually in the exhibition, they're displayed next to each other. So the first one is Bondage 3, which is the work that we can see here,
Mm-hmm.
where the rope is crisscrossed all over the canvas to create this tight grid-like surface, like a web. And then the other painting is 400 Years, which is displayed next to it. And in this work, the rope has been looped into two coils that are suspended from the top of the canvas, and then attached to another two coils which hang over the surface. Can you talk about materiality in relation to these works and this reliance on these found objects?
Yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to make these. I've been wanting to make these paintings. I feel like in the time and days that we're in, I think paintings call for a little, especially abstract paintings. I feel like call for a little more than color, texture, uh, energy. I think, I was thinking about using things that could almost memorialize a painting or memorialize a picture, or kind of give a picture a kind of a tactile nature where it feels less like a painting, more like an object. And this is like these are kind of my first iterations of this, or my first attempts of trying this. And how I got led to maybe this thin rope, or maybe to the slightly thicker rope that is on Bondage 3 is, that's linked to the consciousness of using leftover materials that come from the actual canvas itself. So I started making these drape paintings where when I would paint on unstretched canvas, and I'm ripping the canvas, for stretching, or I'm ripping to break a bigger piece off of it. As you can see this work here, Swing Low on the far right, I'm left over with all this debris of like, threading coming from the canvas. And I'm just thinking like, wow, how can I make these images kind of more than just the paintings that they are? And so I started to kind of use the things that were in the studio or in the environments around my studio, which is an example of how I'm bringing the sticks in. And so as I started to kind of drape these kind of leftover strings from the canvas, when I wanted to work on bigger works and was trying to also do the same thing, it just didn't quite work because the strings were too light. And I didn't have enough of them. And so I thought, well, maybe I need to kind of get something a little thicker, and so that's what led me to rope. And when I went into the studio to kind of drape this rope over the bigger works, it didn't work. It didn't feel like it didn't feel natural. But what is rope used for? It's used for tying. It's used for bonding, wrapping. And so I thought, well, I should just use this material and it's not, and for what it's used for. And that's how the bondage kind of paintings kind of started to come about. And even when thinking about kind of the bundles that are on 400 years, it's also about me, just like I'm kind of going to paintings and trying to figure out different ways in which to build texture, or to get certain palettes, or to bring certain things to the picture, to kind of evolve them or change them or grow them. I also had that same kind of thought process when using this rope. And so when I did the first bundle, it sat there for a while, and I was like, wow, I was like, what does this bundle mean? Like, what does this mean? Beyond just me like trying to find a new way in which to make a abstract picture. And what it made me kind of think about is like these strings of like a timeline almost, or like a string of history, or a string of lineage, or yeah, I guess more so of a string of lineage. And I started to think about all the families and all the histories that have been wiped away and lost, and destroyed over time through the bondage of, slavery, just mass eradication of people. And I just thought that, wow, like this bundle can represent like a sense of a 400 years, right? Or 100 years. And that I need to add the other 300 years to kind of represent this 400 years, or maybe it's a little more now, of slavery, that my ancestors have went through. And we're still in a sense of slavery to this day. We might not be in shackles and chains and things like this, but we're definitely still in the sense of a systemic race, in a state of systemic racism. And so that gave purpose to the consciousness that I'm having when I'm painting. I'm putting myself in a scenario or in a situation in the studio that allows me to think differently than what I might have thought in the previous work I was working in, and to put me in a place where I can kind of stretch out or progress my process. And so working with new materials or found materials within the studio helps me think in a different way, and that end result is different works and me using kind of similar materials in different ways. And this is just a 400 years is just an example of one of them. And I also think even when going back to Bondage 3, I do feel that we're in a sense, we're spiritually bound too. You know, our connection, I won't speak in a broader sense, but my connection to the Father, you know, is hindered by maybe, you know, in which in the way that I was used to living a life, but there's laws, there's statutes, there's commandments. And I'm trying to break free or trying to work towards breaking free from maybe these, this, I guess, natural state that I've been living in and kind of fall closer to more of God's word. And so these paintings for me, again, are these, you know, it's a representation of the soul, of the spirit, and kind of me binding this kind of canvas is like a representation of me, and I guess in a literal way of me showing that I myself and maybe others may feel that they are spiritually bound, not knowing where their connection is to God or whatever, you know, one believes in.
I think the significance that you've attributed to some of these materials, particularly as you were talking about 400 years and like relating material to the history of Black Americans in the United States, I think those ideas really come to a kind of apex with the sculpture in the exhibition. So I wonder if we could talk about this work, Last Laugh. I mean, significantly also, it is your first sculpture of your practice. And just to kind of talk through the materials here, we're looking at a cubic form which consists of several bricks, which has the rope tied around it, again, like in the bondage painting. We can see recycled steel car parts. There's a steel rod. And bronze slave transport, which is this shackle form right at the top. So can you talk about the transition to working three-dimensionally, which is where your painting's like heading to, but presumably there is a difference in approach when you're actually creating something that is a sculpture rather than a painting, and that doesn't have any painterly qualities to it. And also the significance of some of these materials. I mean, the bronze slave transport in particular, I think, and how you kind of arrived at that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a continuous or continued loop of thinking from the paintings and now trying to go into like a three-dimensional plane. You know, working with these materials that I've brought into the studio to make paintings with, and then the remnants or leftovers, and kind of using those and bringing those back into paintings. It really started to make me think about paintings in the sense of a ready-made. I'm like, you know, these are ready-made materials. You know, canvas is not just used for painting. You know, they're used for other things. You know, paint as well is used to paint interiors, exteriors. You know, but actually at the same time, we have acrylics for paintings, and rope as well is not used in particularly for painting, but is used in a sense to bond and tie things. And so it made me think about, okay, well, maybe instead of, because I did make one other sculpture and I haven't shown it yet. It's not complete. I think I like gave a peek of it on Instagram or something like this, but it made me think about, like maybe my relationship to sculpture is to start in the ready-made, right? And like, how do I go about that? And then I just went all the way to the deep end. I was like, okay, these paintings, you know, they're about, you know, I'm making these bondage paintings, I'm making these drape paintings, you know, I'm making these paintings that have this kind of like these deep and dark undertones, you know. Well, when I think about the ready-made, I'm not going to just go out and just go find any objects. Let me go actually hunt for these things. And so I started thinking about slave transports. Um, and I was watching a class I watch more in the sense of a Bible study, and it was going over. They were talking about bondage and things like that, and I started looking up, slave shackles and transport, and I was just looking at the brutalism of the brutalist nature of them, and I was like, usually when you see these things, they're in a museum, right? They're like glass stuff, they're boxed, that's kind of weird to me because it's like I'm almost going to a museum where I'm supposed to go uh, experience history or, get some type of experience, but who's owning these objects? Who's owning these things, right? And then it made me think about the Astor and his kind of, I've seen him kind of go out and seek to like buy back our pain in a bit, in a way. And so I was like, wow, like this is making a lot of sense for me to kind of, even if I don't use these things in the studio or in a sense of making anything, I need to go out and hunt and be a collector of, you know, my people's history, maybe how we feel shame about the past or but I need to go and like collect these things. And when I got it in the studio, it was in there for a while. It was in there. Um, and then again, I started to think about my environment and I started thinking about what's around me. And where my studio is in Maspeth, there's a whole bunch of car shops and like what do you call these things? Metal yards where they like dump metal and old car parts. And so I started to go around and I started to ask, hey, you guys got any car parts that you're not going to use? And I found one particular shop that was like, yo, we have stuff all the time. You could come and check anything out. You like it, you could take it. And I just thought about how slavery, and I mean, this is something that's like, this is like no like eureka moment or no new notion, but like slavery it is and still is a sense of slavery. I guess today is still how this country has been ran and built, when I'm speaking about the United States of America. And so for me to kind of go back and use car parts that are used to activate a vehicle and to bring that together with something that has this dark nature to it, but that was used to activate the country that I was born in, it just felt right. It felt purposeful. It felt, just. And for me to kind of own that gave me some sense of power. And then I was thinking about kind of closing the the transport when showing it, but then it kind of gave me some hope and relief when I had it open, because if you look, it looks like a double smile almost. And that's why I titled it Last Laugh.
Yeah.
And it does say in the scriptures and Revelations, it speaks about, those who put those in captivity shall go into captivity. So I thought that was kind of like I always thought that was kind of a thing. And then when I think about these bricks, I mean, again, what was, when I was thinking about a plinth or how to kind of show this thing, right? Show this ready-made, a wooden plinth came to mind, just regular white plinth came to mind. And at the last minute, I thought, these, building, structure, foundation, and then in relation to the US, and so I thought bricks was like just a very automatic uh, thing to use to kind of build this thing that it sits on. And then lastly, the ropes came very last minute. They actually came very spontaneous. But I'm like that in the studio. I'll work on a painting and I'll think it's done and I'll come back at, maybe before it needs to be shipped and I'll go and change something. And so I kind of I was in that same mode when using this, and it kind of brought it together. And that's how Last Laugh was formed.
I mean, there's this extensive history, of course, of artists using found materials and objects that they take from everyday life and incorporate into their works. And your works especially make me think of African-American artists who were really instrumental in developing abstract art in the United States, particularly early on, like in the 1960s and 70s, around the time of the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. And I think that because it connects to how you yourself have just defined abstraction in your work, as it relates to the Black experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I immediately think of artists like Mel Edwards and Noah Purifoy, who were using debris to create their sculptures. As some people here might know, you know, Mel Edwards started his Lynch Fragment series in 1963, where he was turning scraps of metal into these really quite brutal looking forms that were trying to acknowledge the history of violence that African Americans had been subject to for centuries. And then, you know, a couple of years later, in 1965, Noah Purifoy is making sculptures from burned and melted objects that resulted from the Watts Rebellion. And these artists weren't trying to conceal the origins of those materials, quite the opposite. It was rather an acknowledgement of history, and a way perhaps of saying that some kind of beauty could be reached in the aftermath of violence. And I think that's kind of what you're saying with your own work.
No, most definitely. I mean, diamonds are made from pressure, you know. And I do believe the things that one goes through in life are, to shape them to be the person that they're meant to be. And so even when kind of going back and like using these elements that might have these maybe darker history, or not maybe, but that has a dark past or a dark history, there is beauty in them as well. But I also think there is something beautiful about ones who history ties to that object, right, or ties to those dark notions, is the one who's actually creating the beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I've kind of made it a point now to go and kind of try and collect these things, or things that are connected to my ancestors, and get them out of the hands of those who aren't them, and to own them and to house them and to keep them, and to kind of fall in that lineage of, artists who kind of were speaking, on those themes, but to do it, my way and my time. Purefoy he's great. He's a beast.
Precisely. And also thinking actually about geography for a second, specifically the West Coast, because I was reading something about, you spent time growing up in Oakland, California, and you've spoken about your interest in a couple of important abstract artists from Oakland, Raymond Saunders and Oliver Lee Jackson. And I read that you were talking about how you were seeking some kind of history of Black American artists making abstract works, and it's only really in the last couple of years that you've come across that history, because up until very recently there's been really limited visibility for artists like Saunders and Lee Jackson. So now that you have that framework, how do you think that's impacted on your thinking?
I mean, it's been great because it's, my journey as being a painter who seeks to make abstract pictures, it all comes from the New York school, for the most part. And then kind of coming across, or being able to come across somebody like Raymond Saunders, and not only him making abstract pictures, but him pleading to his contemporaries about the way in which the Black body is being shown, the access that we give to the Black body, and him having that ideal that I share, years and years ahead, it made me just feel like not alone. It just made me feel like, it's like, I'm like, I was on this like island, by myself. And not to say that there isn't other artists of color, men and women, that are making abstract pictures. But, when looking back, I didn't have the knowledge. I wasn't in the know. I'm self-taught. I've everything I've learned has been through seeing shows and reading and kind of chasing after the knowledge myself. So when I went to this MoCA show in Los Angeles and I seen that Raymond Saunders painting and I seen the text and the notions that he was making, I was like, wow. And it just made me even more, or even the show Soul of a Nation, and going and seeing Jack Whitten and Gilliam and all these guys, being monumental in that space. I think it just gives you a sense of refuge, to be honest. It makes me feel like I got my uncles over here, got my great uncles over there, like, and it's almost like a motivation, in a sense. Or even I think about Stanley Whitney. Him and his son did an interview at one point, and he was speaking about how during that time, it was like the Black Panther movement, and like, they're going out recruiting people, Black and brown folk coming together, and he's in the basement painting, and he would feel bad about himself painting when he could have been maybe doing something, maybe he felt more important. And that's how I feel. I'm like, I'm in my studio making paintings, like traveling, seeing other shows, getting inspired to kind of spew out these feelings or emotions or ideals on like the times. But like I could like be, I could be in the field, I could be in the streets, and is this right, or is this kind of a selfish thing? And so I think just, as a young man of color, and you see examples of what you're trying to do before you, it just gives a sense of confidence. It gives you a different type of springboard. Gives you a different type of relevance, I feel.
And I think that your work and the other artists that you cited, abstraction is clearly something that can be used as a strategy. It's a way of addressing the social world. It's certainly not something that is separate from it. It can, it can both evoke, it can commemorate reality, and also even challenge what's meant by activism. I think particularly like right now. We're going to go to questions from the audience in a few minutes, but just to finish, I wanted to talk about your first museum show, your first solo museum presentation, which is happening next year.
Very excited for that.
Exactly, it's at the in
so
North Carolina. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate. I was born in North Carolina, Jacksonville. My father actually was in the Marines and was stationed there, and that's how I was born there. And my mom moved from Carbondale, Illinois. But my father moved first, and then asked my mom to marry him, and she came down later. And then I left North Carolina like at 1 or 2, so I've never really spent real time there. So for me to have my first solo museum show there is kind of it's strange, but I feel like it just feels right, and it'll be a mix of older works, but then it also be also a presentation for me to show where I am currently, and where I was actually when I was showing with the end in mind, because I'm a pretty avid painter, so I'm like was excited to kind of get these newer works. It's like I'm always showing where I was maybe months or a year before, rather than showing where I am currently. So I'm just excited that I get to show these paintings, these newer works, and then kind of like the older works in kind of like a complete presentation, and get people to kind of be able to kind of see my growth over the years in like one space, but at the same time see that like, during this time I've been thinking all throughout this process. This has been me. I've grown in front of people rather than doing this, behind closed doors and then showing. I've always been chasing it every single exhibition. But yeah, I'm very excited for the show. It opens June 3rd of 2022.
You've got the date. We've all been told. We'll be there.
Please do.
Okay, I'm going to hand back to Chloe now so we can take some questions. But thank you so much, Reggie, for speaking tonight.
No, thank you. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Hi, I'm glad you're back. Yeah, thank you both. That was so great to like hear more about the show, and I feel like you really went deep in there. I'd love to hear like No Forthcoming get shouted out as well. He's my favorite. Incredible artist. So we've got a couple of questions. Please do, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A bar on the bottom, so please do type them in, and yeah, we'll get around them. So the first question is, let's do answer live. The first question is, why is it important for the paintings to feel like objects or like something more than a painting?
I think that's just a personal preference. I think I've been looking at abstract paintings for a long time now, and I just think that there is something kind of magnificent and extraordinary when you see painters that work in an abstract mode kind of bring in outside materials in order to memorialize a picture or make it more monumental. You know, you think of like Hammonds or even Frank Bowling, you know, the way in which they bring in outside things, you know, they almost look like these things you can kind of find in like the crevice of the world or something, you know, like, and you just bring in your home. And I just think that was, you know, that's, I think a tactile sensibility to the work is something that I really want in my paintings, and just trying to find more ways in which to do that in my own voice is something I'm very fascinated about. And it's great to kind of be in the studio and make a picture and go, wow, this is beautiful, but then make a picture similar and to add outside elements, and it just changes the whole pictorial nature of the finished object. And so I think it's yes, so maybe it's a little bit of obsession of mine, if anything. Yeah.
Well, I have to say I've been working around the paintings for a while, and it feels like each of those elements that aren't, you know, acrylic and canvas, they kind of bring their own memories.
Yeah.
Their own set of references. And then the other question, someone asked, what is the significance of the title With the End in Mind?
Oh, so that title actually came from a conversation I was having with my father the last time I was able to see him prior to the pandemic. And me and my dad, when we talk, we have like these long, like we don't talk like every day and like have kind of brief conversations. We like talk, you know, kind of sporadically. We have these long-winded conversations, like literally like 2 to 5 hours. I mean, I literally talked about that for like 5 hours on the phone. Like he's like, I got work to do. You got work to do, you know. But we're having this long conversation just about life and, you know, where I am as a young man, and, you know, family, and, you know, maybe having a wife someday and children, and you know, the state of the world and religion, and, you know, what's going on in the world and how it relates to scripture and these things that are being said in the Bible. And so we kind of ended the conversation on him going, I read this book, and he said the author of the book was speaking about living life, you know, but with an end goal in mind, or having like an end, like an end goal in mind. And you know, he was like, and my dad told me, he was like, you know, you have to live each day, and you have to make each move that you make in life with the end in mind. And I just thought, I literally said to him, I was like, Dad, that's a show title. That's a show title. And so for me, it was like, and I think that's where I'm in my life too. Everything that I do, you know, I am thinking about the end, and not even just the end. And I don't mean to be so deep, but not even just the end in the sense of, you know, my life, but then the afterlife. You know, how am I investing? I'm investing in things so I can live in a comfortable life now, but how am I investing into my soul so that when I pass on, that there's something for me at the end? And So I just thought that was a very appropriate title. I do feel like we're in the end times, and a lot of crazy things are going on. And so for me, that was just like so perfect to name the show that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very it makes for a lot of introspection, I guess, when you're thinking, when everything you're doing is like with that in mind.
Yeah.
I have another question. To Allie, actually, what was it? Can you tell us a bit more about the Soul of a Nation reader and what it was like to kind of pull together all of those texts? And obviously, that was,
Yes.
but how we kind of came across your work, and yeah, love to say a bit more about it.
I mean, it was an incredible project. It was 6 years in the making. The book has like just over 200 writings by Black American artists and scholars and critics from the period who are, really examining like what is Black art, what does that mean. A big part of the book is this precise argument that we were talking about tonight, which is the role of abstraction and how it can be used as a device during periods of turmoil, and it was really an eye opener also to find out about artists who simply haven't been acknowledged. I think a big point about the book is that it happened because we couldn't find anything that resembled it, which is why we had to go to libraries and archives, which is what I was on. I was on the ground in New York, going to the Schomburg Center, going to the New York Public Library to find these writings that no one else would ever have the opportunity to see because they're hidden away in an archive. A lot of the texts also that we've published in the book have never been published before. So it was really I think just a really important project for the purposes of highlighting this 2-decade period in American art that just needs a lot more acknowledgement.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because it's all about archiving, not letting these things be forgotten. So important. And Reggie's asked, in searching, whose writing moved you the most?
Or
Allie.
stuck with you the most?
Yeah.
Is this to me? Sorry.
Yeah. When you were researching, who kind of stuck out to you? What was kind of the most poignant?
Oh, I mean, there's such a diversity of writing, and I think the project also is amazing in the sense of just being exposed to so many different authors and being aware of just the massive range in writing styles and approaches to writing in itself. So when you're reading it, it's like it just varies so seriously from page to page. It's like that in itself, I think, is a real joy of the book, in terms of celebrating how artists and critics actually write. But yeah, in terms of authors, I mean, I guess particularly in the early 60s, I mean, someone like Larry Neal, Amiri Baraka, their writing was fierce. It really was. I mean, and what they were saying, it's very hard to ignore that kind of rhetoric. And then there are other texts where artists are writing about other artists, which is a really nice relationship to think about as well, in terms of friendships and how artists collaborated during the period. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Amazing. Okay. Well, anybody that doesn't have the Soul of the Nation reader needs to go get that. It's important.
And essential.
It's a gem. It's a real gem. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I think we'll close up. But yeah, thank you guys. Thank you so much to Reggie and to Ali and to everybody who's like tuned in to watch this. I think it's been, yeah, a really great conversation. Just opened up so many doors for this exhibition. Exhibition is open in London until the 14th of August. So if anyone does want to come down and catch it, please do. This conversation has been recorded and it'll be released probably sometime next week, so you can listen back. And yeah, enjoy your evening, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allie. Thanks, Chloe.
Thank you.
Thanks.